Thank you all so much for joining us. This is the 5th presentation of our 2nd day of the Caring Conference, Our Resilient Spirit, and I am thrilled and delighted to introduce you to Beth Rooney, who's going to help us on Decision Day. So take it away, Beth.
Very much for having me, Denise. So great to see everybody here today. Very excited to be here. I'm going to share with you my experience with the appalling options of Decision Day. So I was a family caregiver for my father for 5 years. He had dementia and diabetes, and during the last year of his life, he had cancer. And that's what led to sort of the decision making. So what we're going to talk about is the change in perspective that we experienced as we approached this decision. So we ended up reshaping our perspective, which led to calm and just a much better approach, different approach to things. Learning to accept changes that help us move forward, and releasing the need to control the uncontrollable to bring calm. But where we started was with a cardiologist. So because my dad had been seeing a cardiologist for other things, he was the one who initially evaluated my dad's 2 cancers that he had in his neck. So the surgeon, a cardiologist recommended 2 surgeries to treat the cancers, 2 separate surgeries, 1 on each side. And that if he didn't, and told us, my sister and me, that's my sister, my dad, and me down at the bottom there. So my sister Claire, we were a team, which was great. So the cardiologist said that you could have Dad could have the 2 surgeries, or he was facing a slow, gruesome death. Words I actually wrote down because I was so horrified to hear them. And when I called the next, we were just in shock. And my dad was at a point in his dementia where he couldn't really understand what the decision-making was or what was entailed. And he couldn't even remember the diagnosis and the discussion, hours later, that kind of thing. So my sister and I kind of slept on it. The next day, I called the doctor's office to get some clarification and ask a bunch of questions. And she said the same thing about this gruesome death. And I thought, okay, that's a super weird thing coming out of that doctor's office. So that made me really be concerned about the approach from there. But it wasn't until a friend said, okay, have you guys seen, he's got cancer. Have you seen an oncologist? And we said, no, don't know why it didn't even dawn on us. We were just so in shock about his decline and this diagnosis and this gruesome death prediction. And so then we did make an appointment with an oncologist who, of course, assessed my father's wishes. And we knew, because throughout his life, he had said he did not want a lot of intervention at the end, when it was clear that there wasn't a lot of chance of, extending any quality of life, that we should just, let him live out the rest of his life. And so as we explained this with my dad there to the oncologist, the oncologist talked to us about hospice. At the time, I really knew very little about hospice, but they were at my dad's house by 6 p.m. that night, and we learned all about hospice, which was one of the most wonderful things on the planet. So that process, that day, the decision was easy once we understood what the choices were and why those choices were those choices. So the cardiologist gave us the 2 surgeries or the gruesome death, which I'll spare the details of. But the oncologist gave us a 3rd approach, which was simply keeping my dad comfortable throughout the rest of his days. And it wasn't clear how long that was going to be. It could have been a month, it could have been 18 months. It was absolutely unclear. But we decided that completely resonated with us in terms of my dad's stated lifelong wishes. So what I really, really learned about Decision Day was that a doctor's specialty affects the approach to care. So the cardiologist was looking at it from the perspective of, how can I, as a cardiologist, fix the problem? And that's what specialists are trained to do, which is great in many instances. But he wasn't even, I don't think he was even thinking about necessarily other ways to handle the situation. And that's what we really needed, was kind of the look at all of the options. And with a man who's 86 years old with extensive dementia and a host of other health problems he had come through and was still dealing with, what does that view look like? So when I did get the cardiologist back on the phone, after speaking to his nurse the next day, I said, okay, so say we even do one of these surgeries or do both of them. I didn't think, in fact, that my dad would make it through one of them, much less two of them. So that was, another piece of the agonizing decision. So I said, if we do these surgeries and my dad does make it through them, what is the likelihood? Like, what really happens? Is he cured? Is it just going to slow the progression of what is going to be, a terrible disease progression? And he actually said, well, as an absolute cure, there's a 5% chance. So it wasn't until I pressed about this that I even learned that there was this very small chance that this would even be what I would have considered completely successful. But there was no discussion about any of that type of thing. So that was the big takeaway. But this actually transpired over about 3 or 4 days. And it was actually just the worst time of my entire life. And when, now that I understand how to look at the end of life, it's a very different approach for me. So we were still in that situation where it was that day and the next few days, and how was this going to go? We didn't have any sense of the big picture of managing the end of life. So what we really did was reshape our perspective, and that's what I want to kind of help people do here today. The bigger picture of how the end of life takes place is that everybody is going to reach the end of life. And if you have a general sense of whether you're a person who wants every avenue, if you want to go down every single avenue to prolong life, no matter what, that's one way of approaching it. And if you're somebody like me who says, okay, eventually I'll get to a point where my quality of life is not going to be good enough for me to want to go through trying to cure rather than move to comfort care. So understanding what your feelings are about that and what your caree's feelings are about that are well ahead of time, or at least as much ahead of time as possible, will make a big difference when that time actually comes, because that time is going to come. And then you can, once you kind of get that sense of, okay, there's sort of disease progression, there's fixing, and there's moving from the goal of fixing the situation to the goal of making someone comfortable and ensuring the best quality of life for them through the end of their life. And you can kind of look at how the specifics of any given situation fit into that overall landscape. So once we made the decision, I had such a feeling of calm and confidence about how we were moving forward. And I never, ever doubted it after that. I never doubted what we did or how we did it to, anything more than a speck here or there. But what a different experience. And if I hadn't had that clarity about how to look at the whole big picture, I would have just been an absolute wreck, as I was on those days, deciding minute by minute how to handle the situation. So I want to encourage everybody to use the chat. Tell me, have you had a situation like this? How you handled it? There are a lot of things that go into this. There are family dynamics. You may feel differently about an approach to the end of life from your caree, and other family members may have yet different views on all of this. And so there are a lot of ins and outs. All right, I'm going to take a look at the chat here. So M. Colley saying, so glad to hear hospice was a wonderful option. Yes, it was night and day. The different, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this, but I'll just, from my experience, it was the difference from, okay, family caregiver, you're kind of taking up a lot of our time and energy in dealing with what we need to get done here for your dad, and to, okay, family, tell us all about what you think and what your dad needs and how we can help you with what you guys want. So it was encouraging us rather than telling us what to do. It was a completely different experience. All right, so she says, I was an oncology nurse, then hospice for 27 years, helped care for dad with lung cancer as an 18-year-old girl, then mom who lived with me at 29, and 2 little ones, breast cancer. Your thought process for making decision was wonderful. Well, thank you. I'm glad to hear that. It just, it gives me such a different perspective on life in general. Because when you do look at the big picture of your entire life, not just in caregiving, you really take yourself out of that day-to-day of sort of parsing the little bits and look at it holistically and see how all of this is going to play out and what the priorities are. And then Allison, hi Allison, overwhelming experience to be bombarded with what was happening and what decisions we had to make. Yeah, I'm sure it's, bombarded is a great word because you're bombarded with information, you're bombarded with your own feelings, how to handle them, the feelings of everybody involved, and sort of the whole bigger healthcare industry. You've got lots of people looking at you. Yesterday, I think we were talking about being reviewed, and everyone is reviewing you. You're reviewing yourself, you're reviewing how they're reviewing you. And this is all taking place while you're in a horrible panic, trying to figure out what the best approach is. And we were feeling like, oh my gosh, am I pointing my dad? Like, it almost felt like no matter what we did, we were heading him into a terrible situation. And, all I could sort of think was, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm killing my dad. Horrible feelings to feel. But when you have in advance an understanding of how you want to handle the end of life, and particularly if, like me, you want to sort of have an approach and have your legal documents in place even, which I do after careful consideration. And that can really give you a lot of peace of mind going into an end-of-life situation or any situation where you are in a decision-making situation. All right, so let's see, Kathy Murray. When my mom had her final stroke, we were grateful she left her wishes in writing. Yeah, so all we had to do was follow them, as hard as that was. Yeah, what a gift that is. And I am giving my children that gift. My dad thought he gave us that gift, and it turned out that there were a lot of kind of holes in the situation that because although he had been a caregiver for his mother for 10 years, it was a little bit of a different situation. And there are just so many pieces that need to be addressed, but I'm going to come back to those. So, all right, Denise, thank you for sharing. Marilyn, for being with us today. Oh, okay, I guess Marilyn just joined. Tony, hi Tony, I concur with your comment that doctors' advice from their perspective, specialty, and don't even refer to others very often for additional information. Yeah, and that is, like you said, very commonplace. Also, a lot of doctors do not want to have end-of-life discussions. Many of them aren't trained in it. Many of them are very uncomfortable with it. Only recently has that really been a billable situation for them. And they are very focused on, I can fix this by doing this, and that's what they tell you. And so to be equipped to say, to ask the questions, what are other options? How does this kind of take place in the big picture of what's available medically and not medically? And many times, the end of life is not a medical situation. Eventually, we will all get old enough that we will wear out and we will die. And it doesn't need to be handled medically. But again, that's sort of another story for another day. But Allison, not knowing what it was all about either. Yep. Jessica, hi Jessica. It's important to get people all of the information about their diagnosis to make an informed decision. It really is key. You don't know what you don't know. Exactly. And even if you know questions, I found that 2 really helpful questions are, what haven't I asked about that you think I should know? And if this was your family member, what would you do? And you often won't get a lot of specifics about what would you do, an answer to that question, but you'll get a general sense. I've had every doctor I've asked that to, or nurse, has given me some insight that was very, very helpful, even if it wasn't specific to kind of my dad's situation or theirs, but you'll get some helpful tidbit of information by asking that. So yeah, that's really helpful. Okay, I signed up this for me and to share with staff who could use more tools for coping with being caregivers. Yeah, and just sort of advising on this type of conversation. That is absolutely it. Okay. So if we do, so Jessica, if we do this XYZ thing, what will be the quality of life for my loved one? Yeah, talking about quality of life and what is quality of life, and it's different for everybody, right? So, and we have Tony who had breast cancer and saw a reconstructive surgeon about the surgery, didn't understand his advice. And based on the stage that it was, fortunately I had a friend to go the appointment with me. That's really, really helpful, is to, whenever there's a doctor appointment, to have somebody else go with you, preferably somebody who can take notes while you're sort of digesting the information and can ask the questions that are top of mind. That person can jot down questions if you run out of time, or that you kind of need to delve into further. Had a wonderful conversation, did not go through with the reconstruction. Yeah, one conversation can really drastically change the course of treatment. I'm glad you're happy with your decision. And great 2 questions. Okay, good. Totally have used those for decades. Yeah, they make all the difference. Okay, anything else before we move on? All right. Okay, so second here was, for me, learning how to accept that change in perspective. We changed the goal. The goal had been all along, how can we fix Dad? I realized eventually that my whole approach was this, trying to get my dad back to baseline. It wasn't realistic. He was 86, his dementia was progressing, he had all kinds of complications from you name it. And every time he didn't get back to kind of the original baseline, it was this feeling of panic, and I failed him, and what else could I do? And so eventually I realized that I needed to change the goal, and that I was solving for a different problem. We're trained to be problem solvers. Okay, here's the problem, here's how we solve it, chop, 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 let's go. But during decision day, the problem completely shifted from fixing my dad to, that intense desire to giving him the best quality of life, with that shift from curative care to comfort care. And that was just such a huge point of personal growth for me and for my family. And it made, again, just all the difference in moving forward and being able to cope. So that's where this resilience piece comes in, right? We were at the bottom of what we could handle and feeling this terrible responsibility to manage my dad's life because he was incapable of making any decisions at that point. And knowing that we were making the right decision just freed me from the guilt and the stress, and my energy came back. It didn't come back to anywhere where it is today. You don't realize how much energy caregiving sucks out of you until you're really out of it. And then you look back and you think, oh my gosh, I can't believe how I didn't even realize the impact that caregiving is having on me. But it did let me move from absolute bottom, rock bottom, to a place of peace of mind, where I knew that I was doing the right thing and that we were moving in the right direction. And our sole goal, the fight was out of it. We were fighting to get my dad fixed. The fight was out of it, and it was simply this peaceful, deep breath. Okay, now we just need to take care of Dad until his final day. So feel free again to join in the chat here and send any kind of thoughts you've got on things, or additional insights, things that have happened in your experience, personally, professionally, with yourself, your caree, anywhere along the line here. So another piece of this sort of accepting the changes is in your relationships with other people outside of caregiving. So I had been so steeped in caregiving as my dad's decline happened rapidly that I was not taking the usual steps I would to be in touch with friends and more distant family and that kind of thing. And so once I took off that huge burden of how am I going to fix my dad? This is getting really bad. I could then connect with people again on a better level than I had, which gave me additional strength, which really was additional resilience. Okay, Tony, it's critical to know caree's wishes well before they're unable to communicate them. Yes, absolutely. And that is a process. That's not a one-step situation. I have actually a couple of resources I'll mention, we'll see at the end here, but on my website, they're free. An end-of-life planning guide about how to do just that. We get legal documents in place and we think we're all set, but understanding the nitty-gritty of what your caree really thinks is going to have, honest conversations, right, Terry? Yeah, not just like, this is not a fluff conversation. This is, it's very deeply meaningful to everybody involved, but often in different ways. But the idea is to understand what's coming and kind of really talk through, like, I like to look at it as, what's the first step when the end of life is approaching? What are the considerations? How, in terms of talking with family and having things transpire, where is this going to take place? Who's going to be there? Who's not going to be there? All those types of details. But it all starts with the conversation about people's values, about how they want to spend their time remaining, and what level of intervention, medical intervention, they want. Yes, Allison, absolutely. Best thing is to start the conversation. The Conversation Project is a great place to find materials, all kinds of materials about how to start conversations, how to start with family members, how to start with doctors, how to start with children, how to start with people who are heading into or have dementia to varying degrees. And I cannot highly enough recommend those materials for starting the conversation. Okay. And then there's releasing the need to control the uncontrollable. So I was all about the control when I was taking care of my dad, controlled every single thing I possibly could. And to change from that was really a change in the habits of how I work and how I approach things. And it was a time of huge adapting from that mode to, okay, what is the best way for me to keep my dad comfortable? What is any way to give him a quality of life during this time? And, the bouncing back takes time, but I started to bounce back during that time and, certainly afterward. So after my dad died, I had such peace of mind that we had done everything we could to keep him comfortable. And the peace of mind that I had there helped me bounce back, I think, much more quickly. I had other family members where there was a decision that they ultimately think is not the right decision now, but that family member died 4 days after a diagnosis, after a surgery that maybe shouldn't have taken place had they had more information and more sort of understanding, this perspective that we're talking about here today. And they had a much harder time bouncing back because they had regret. And regret is a terrible thing, and you can't go back. But let's look at our chat here. So M. Colley, in Illinois, you can order 5 wishes. Yes, another great roadmap, to the caree's wishes. Do you want music playing in the background? Yep, I actually talk about that in my personal planning guide. And, do you want kids? Do you want dogs? Some people want the dog right there at the bedside. Other people would say, oh my gosh, I don't want any animals involved when I'm not doing well, or I'm near my, my final weeks, days, whatever. If it isn't a legal document, but currently in Illinois can be used like a living will, that's great. From Donita, now that my mom's cognitive ability has improved, I want to discuss end-of-life planning with her. We were at the end of life on life support when her stroke occurred, and it's a miracle she is where she is now, which is amazing. Denise, 5 wishes is wonderful. Yep, you are wise, Donita, absolutely. So hard to have the conversation, and it's so helpful to have them. Yeah, so focusing on the quality of life is sort of a separate conversation all in itself. There, like I said, it's not a conversation, it's a process of conversations, but starting it is key, and understanding what somebody's quality of life is. When somebody is nearing the end of life, there could very well be things that surface in their minds about what they think about the quality of their life. And they may think, okay, this is the last chance for me to be able to do this. I had a family where somebody had a falling out with a family member, hadn't talked in 20 years or whatever, and they really wanted to have a conversation and could, bridge that gap before the end of life. And that was huge. And it had really hadn't been talked about a lot in recent years, but it was always at the back of that person's mind. And if somebody hadn't asked her what she wanted and how she, was there sort of anything lingering in the back of her mind, or that she really wanted to make sure she addressed before the end of life, then that never would have happened. And, happy tears all around. So that was tremendous. All right. So yeah, controlling the uncontrollable. But there is so much that we can't control, but in terms of keeping someone comfortable, asking the questions to the doctor about what is comfortable, what is considered comfortable. Pain management is always challenging, I think, after a certain point. And dealing with pain medication, there are a lot of challenges there. So this is another kind of conversation that you can think about having or have in advance with a doctor, is about pain control. Is there a pain control specialist that you can consult? Is there going to be trouble getting different levels of pain control medications? So that was kind of my big worry, was that I had experienced in other situations where there was a great deal of pain, and then, in the hospital, for example, you have to ask the nurse, who then has to go contact the doctor, who will write the order eventually. And, takes hours, and then the pain is less controllable and it's terrible. So I knew I wanted to avoid that. So we had conversations early on about the minute that I wanted to be prepared to address the pain, the minute that it looked like it was going to be an issue. And so I did feel like I was set to do that, and that my dad did not suffer. As far as I know, my dad did not suffer at all. His last week of his life, a week before he died, we were out to lunch, and a week later he was gone. So it was a very fast, very sudden decline there. And that was my big thing, was just, after a couple of days, he wouldn't really communicate. And so I couldn't tell, or couldn't communicate. And so I couldn't really tell. So I just took the dose that the medication that we had, and the highest dose that we could give. And that's just what I gave as soon as we were able to, according to the schedule. And as far as I can tell, that kept him comfortable. All right. Again, feel free to, join in the chat here. But meanwhile, whoops, sorry, let's see, accepting changes. Oh, Donita, now that my mom's cognitive ability has improved, I really want to discuss her end-of-life planning with her. Oh, sorry, that was before. Okay, sorry, I scrolled up, I didn't realize. All right, accepting changes. Okay, after decision day, yes. So quality of life. And so this is my sister and my dad and I. enjoying, this is what my dad liked to do. He liked to go out for lunch. So this was a little bit before, that last week. But another piece of, after you kind of get a good understanding of what somebody is looking for in terms of their quality of life, then you can kind of address or along with to address their legacy. So I don't know how many people really think about their legacy sort of during the day-to-day of life at maybe our stages of life, but as you get older and as you approach what you think will be the end of life, especially if you know you have a short amount of time left, you do start thinking about what you want, how you want people to remember you. And there are some ways of controlling that and some ways of there's no control over that to some degree. But you can do things to ensure that the legacy you want to leave is what you are leaving. So you can do legacy projects like write letters or make videos or create a photo album or plant a memory garden or, all kinds of things, absolutely limitless in anybody's imagination. And then again, sort of talking about the final days and moments, talking about how in detail, how the caree sees those final weeks, days, and moments, like literally seeing. So using visual kind of words, here's what I envision. I want to be, for example, at home in this room with these people, not with these people. If possible, I want to have the sun shining on me, or, and yes, all of that can change over time. Again, that's the conversation and keeping the conversation going. But to actually plan out some of this and share it with family members can make all the difference, so that it's really just going down the road with the plan rather than having the discussion, sort of the, oh my gosh, I never thought about this. And then the discussions, and then the lack of consensus, shall we say, to put it nicely. And, then it's coming one way or another. So anybody want to chime in with any thoughts on any of this? Has anybody sort of thought about how you will influence your legacy, or what you think you're leaving as your legacy versus what you think your legacy is currently versus what you think it could be before the end of your life? Anything like that? It's an interesting thing to start thinking about and start taking steps to actually, have some control over what it is that you're leaving as a legacy to people. Personally, I try to, I like my little nuggets of wisdom, and I share them with my family and my kids in particular. My kids are grown, and they've heard this by now, and they just, yes, Mom, yeah, we know, yeah, we know. So I feel like my kids get it, but I still think about things I could do in terms of like photo albums or whatever. We have photo albums, but I'd like to make each of them just a really special one. And hopefully I will still have time to do that. For me, it's really all about preventing regret. So my motto is basically, we plan and prepare, or we react and regret. And I came to that little nugget by looking at how the experience that I had with my dad and managing his end of life, and that other family group who ended up with such regret. And all of this, again, goes to resilience, because when you have a plan in place and everybody has had time to think about it, time to process it, time to revisit it, fine tune it, just have even just a sense, if not details, a sense of what it is people, the caree wants, because first and foremost is about what the caree wants. We could want something completely different, but we need to honor the wishes of the caree. And so when you do that, that's when you can when you feel like you have that in place or in motion, or after the fact, when you feel like that you've handled the situation in a way that your caree would have approved of, then the bounce back that you get from that is just huge and lasts forever. So here are a couple of free guides I give away on my website. Here's the personal end-of-life planning guide, and there's a template there for sort of writing out the big pieces of that. And learning about managing the hospital stay, where, most of people before the end of their lives will have at least a hospital stay, and learning what to anticipate and what to expect and how to handle all that and the questions to ask can really make a difference in managing that hospital stay. And, understanding whether your caree, some people want to be in the hospital when they die. They don't want to be at home. They don't want to feel like they're a burden on their family at home or leaving bad memories in the room where they died or something like that. And some people are insistent that they want to be at home, or if, it's somebody who's already in hospice, maybe they want to be at a hospice facility. Maybe they feel like that's kind of a happy medium. But, all of these things are things that we can kind of think out in advance. Whoops. And so I went through this a little more quickly than I had anticipated. And I don't know, can we kind of open up to discussion, Denise?
Yeah, I'd love to know, what do you guys worry about your caree's end of life? And if anybody would like to unmute, please feel free to unmute as well.
I know it's hard to pinpoint sometimes because there are so many worries. Or would anyone like to share about their experience on a decision day? Has anyone else had really like a day like that? I mean, sometimes the decisions are small and cumulative rather than, which we also had many of, but this, particular decision day was just a very big day for us, and a big decision that had to be made.
I have talked a little bit in previous workshops and events about my conversations with my parents about their end of life. And I've talked at the conference about my older sister who's not involved. And one of the questions that I've asked my parents is, what do you want to do about my older sister as it relates to your death? Meaning, who visits when you're dying, who visits after your death? I don't know yet what their answer is to whether or not they want my older sister to be there as a visitor as they're dying, but they both agreed that everybody should come and say goodbye after they're dead, which sounds odd, but I'm assuming there's a death. I text everybody, oh, they've died, and then everybody can come and see the body, and there's no barring at the door to some. And I think it's been helpful for me to have these conversations. It feels very odd to throw out the question, do you want your oldest child to come visit you when you're dying? But I want to do what they want. It's not my decision. I want to make sure it's their decision. And I think my parents will each have a different decision, and that's okay. And it's really just about managing with that information about how their end of life happens, how their death happens.
Yeah, and when you know that your caree has stated wishes about someone in particular the caree does not want to have present before or after, then there are decisions to be made about, will that be communicated beforehand? Who will communicate that information? What is the fallout from that going to be? But again, it's focusing on the caree's wishes. And then there are all the different layers of all of this, which are, okay, so if your dad has dementia, is his thinking really sound? Sometimes we had to differentiate between and this was really very infrequent, but sometimes we had to differentiate between what we knew his expressed lifelong wishes were versus what he said now, and we knew that it was the dementia that was not getting it right. And so we had to kind of help him backtrack, which sometimes and some of this was legal stuff. So sometimes we had to kind of set him back on the right track. But regardless, the theme here is getting it out, understanding exactly what your caree wants, preferably before great illness or a stroke happens, they're unable to communicate, or dementia is slowly making them decline, and sharing that information so that, for example, if there's somebody who my dad didn't want there, say, for example, then better to address that beforehand when there isn't the shock and the heartbreak of imminent death, or having him just, having had him just die. And so, but these are all judgments that can change from minute to minute, person to person, depending on the situation. So it's really, really helpful to look at all of this as far in advance as possible and start putting some of the things into place. So I see we've got a couple of new.
I just want to mention, as you read
Sure.
that, I just want to mention that I really push to have my parents in palliative care so that we can transition to hospice care, because I want professionals to support me as I honor the wishes, which could be that my older sister isn't there. I don't want to be the only one. I want a social worker to help me when we're managing these dynamics. And so that's why I've been really pushing them to accept more help.
Jessica, thank you for this. Yeah, Jessica said, I worry I will not have given my mom enough joy, and that will be my focus moving forward. And this is one of the greatest pieces of looking at caregiving sort of from that proactive view of things and the big picture. So, thinking about what is the priority in life. And a lot of times we get so wrapped up in caregiving duties that we neglect the relationship with the caree. And so things like, did we, for my dad, for instance, did we make sure he had enough fun? He loved golf. And so eventually he was unable to play golf, but we took him to, a driving range and let him watch people hit golf balls and things like that. So trying to find the things that were meaningful to him that would give him joy. And, sometimes we did not hit the mark. We took him to the ocean once. And he lived in Florida, and it wasn't a long drive, but he had grown up near the ocean in New York. And I think he just looked so sad. We were looking at it, my sister and I were looking at each other like, uh-oh, this was apparently not the thing to do. Who knew? And because that made him sort of reflect back to a lot of the beginning of his life. And for whatever reason, that was very unsettling to him. So, be prepared. You may not always hit these things right, but asking beforehand, would you like to, what would you think if we did? Those types of things can make a big difference. So Jessica says, with mom having COVID, she and I have had to remind each other what her wishes were as she was being taken away in the ambulance. My heart goes out to you, Jessica. It's important to review wishes as well. They absolutely can change over time. And they absolutely did. My dad would say things back in his younger days that he stopped saying as he got older. And that's another thing, to sort of be keen to listen to what people used to say. And then as it begins to get more real, what they say now. It's important to review wishes. A good reminder to have power of attorney paperwork done. Absolutely. Yeah. And Allison, I love the legacy concept. My mom did a lot of historical writing, battling her way through illnesses, which is awesome. Family stories and that type of thing are a real gift to your family. I originally thought it was her gift and now frame it as her legacy. It was her way of surviving and championing through her battles with cancer. And that's another thing. A lot of that legacy is it gives purpose to the rest of somebody's life. It is very easy to have from what I've seen, to have a diagnosis with a certain amount of time left that's not very long. And you think, okay, as the person with the diagnosis, what is the point of doing anything after this? I'm going to be gone soon. But there is so much that person can do in terms of purpose of life and leaving a sense of what their life's purpose was for their loved ones. Yeah. So, okay, Felicia, POA is very important, and living will as it respects the caregiving decision. Yes, absolutely. And again, that goes to the focus, always, we live in our heads about what we want and what we don't want. And we absolutely need reminders, like right now, to focus on what it is that the caree wants, what their values are, honoring their wishes, in terms of what will and won't happen, spiritual opportunities, all kinds of things that we might not even be aware of, which again is why it's important to ask, what is going to be important to you as this situation progresses, or toward the end of your life? Or have you had any thoughts about things that when you really do get to the end of your life, when you look back, anything that you're going to wish you had done, or that we could address now, kind of thing. And that will help somebody get started in thinking about how to use their time and feel like they've got a purpose through the end of their days. And Denise, thank you. With the help of palliative care nurse, we've completed a post for both parents, which is awesome. So physician orders for life-sustaining treatment. And yeah, that is the beauty of that, is that bridges the communication between what the caree, the family, and the physician all think and agree on. So you can do your kind of work with your caree at home, and then making that transition to making sure that the people involved in delivering that care know what those decisions are, or general approaches, is absolutely critical. Because if there's an emergency, or in my dad's case where there was such a steep decline so quickly, there wasn't going to be time for discussions. It was going to be questions, a minute to think if you're lucky, and a decision. And that time in between is all the time where you think about all that's entailed, all that impacts it, all that it impact, that time period and experience impacts, and what you do and don't want to have happen as a result of that. So yeah. All right, oops. Anybody else like to join in here? We've got about 4 minutes left. So final thoughts, anybody? Oh, is somebody talking?
How do you help family members come along on the journey that may be in denial? Thank you.
That's a very good question, Terry. Thank you for that. And oddly enough, COVID has given us a great opportunity here, because all of us are much more, there's a greater risk to all of us every day now because of COVID. And so I think by now we've all heard the stories of people who became very ill very quickly and did not have time to even think about any of this, much less make decisions. And so to say to somebody, okay, if perchance you got COVID, I want to make sure that I know what you want and what you don't want if you become ill and decisions need to be made. Everybody will come to the end of life, and if it happens sooner than later, I want to be prepared, and make it all about them. What do you want to have happen? How do you want this to go? What do you want to place beforehand? I'd really love to start talking about this. And then, if it's related to a caree, a separate, different person, then you can kind of move the conversation over to that person. So there are a couple of deft ways you can get from point A to point B. It doesn't always need to be that straight line. Does that help at all, Terry? Okay, good.
I wonder if you could also just quickly, I apologize for this last question when time is running out. When you and your caree, or you and the doctor, are on the same page about treatment decisions for a caree, and you know that you're really honoring a caree's wishes, but others in the family are not on the same page, and there's discord between you and other family members about treatment and hospice for a caree. How do you navigate those conversations?
So at that time, I think it's very important to have a separate private conversation with the people who are delivering the care, to explain to them that you have, for example, the power of, you are whatever the power of attorney, that here are the documents that my caree wrote up and expressing the caree's wishes about all this. And I know you can say it's perfect. I think it's perfectly okay to say, I know that sometimes the loudest voice is the one that gets heard. And often when there's a disagreement, that is what happens. The loud disagreeing voice gets heard. And then doctors don't want to fight, be sort of managing the family dynamics, and sometimes they go with the loudest voice. So to say preemptively, please don't go with the loudest voice. This is what my caree wants. I want to make good and sure we're all on the same page about this, and that everybody involved who may join in along the way agree, understands that this is the approach. And that is one great way to keep those voices out of the picture. And Tony, what advice for caree in a memory care and making sure the staff is aware of last wishes? So again, having a private conversation, and all of this is this process thing, right? It's not just, you don't tell one aide, okay, please make sure that this happens, because that's the person you happen to run into that day that you thought about it. But I have had situations where I've sort of mapped out, okay, here are the 4 aides involved and the 2 physicians and the 3 nurses or whatever, gone down my little checklist and made sure just having a quick, you don't want to take over anybody's time too much or anything like that, but to have a private little conversation. Listen, I used to pull out my document out of my pocketbook. I carried this thing with me everywhere, and say, here are my dad's wishes, so they could see them, so they didn't think I was the loud voice over there who was, trying to push something through because of my own agenda. These are my dad's wishes, and I hope, I just want to make sure everybody is aware, so I'm sharing these with you. If you have any questions along the way about this, please let me know. And so if you do it in a kind of methodical way, you can really cover pretty much all the bases. And yes, aides change and all of that sort of thing. But, we as caregivers, I always tried to understand who was who, have a conversation with everybody along the way, and, get them to see my dad as a person, not just that old guy in room 208 or whatever. So let me just see if I missed anything here. In Florida, there's a brain bank. People register, and after death, there's a certain number of hours that the brain bank is notified and the person is picked up, or all is lost if not followed protocol. Yeah, again, we cannot control everything, but what we can control, we can. And let's see, that's why I need POA who agrees with your wishes. Yes, when you're choosing your own POA, you will likely be better off getting somebody who agrees with you, unless you are feel very confident that even if that person doesn't agree with your wishes, that that person will carry out things along with your wishes, that honor your wishes. And yes, somebody who's strong enough to fight others, because you will come across them for a variety of reasons, many of which are not anybody's fault. And we're at 3:52. I'm just going to go very quickly. Thank you, Tony. Allison. Oh, all right. Very good. So I think, Denise, unless there was something else you wanted to.
Excellent. No, we're good.
Okay.
We're good.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Beth.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Well, you're very welcome. And if anybody wants to reach me for further information or anything else, here's where you can find me.
Okay. And we're going to take an 8-minute break and come back for our final presentation with Kathy.